Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Challah. We are up to Perek Daled Mishnah Zayin. Today's Mishnah should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svedlana, Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Minuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. As an introduction, we know Syria, which was a country that was located in what is now the northern part of Syria, along the banks of the Euphrates River. Syria was conquered and added to Eretz Yisrael by David HaMelech. Since the conquest of Syria took place before the entirety of Eretz Yisrael proper was completely conquered and divided, Syria does not have the status of Eretz Yisrael according to biblical law. This Mishnah today's Mishnah is going to record two machlokot, two disputes, one of which pertains to the Challah regarding the status of produce of Syria. Yisrael shayu arisin le'ovdei kochavim b'Syria. Jews who were sharecroppers in the fields of idolaters in Syria. Now, arisin, a sharecropper, is not paid a set amount for his work. Rather, he receives a percentage of the harvested crop from the owner of the land. So Jews who were sharecroppers in the fields of idolaters in Syria, Rabbi Eliezer mechayev perotem b'maasrot u'bashvi'it. Rabbi Eliezer rules that their produce is rabbinically subject to the laws of maasrot and shmitah, because rabbinic law equates Syria with Eretz Yisrael with regards to the laws of maasrot and shmitah. And the Mefarshim explain, produce grown in Eretz Yisrael on land owned by an idolater is subject to maasrot and shmitah. In Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the same is true for produce grown on an idolater's land in Syria. The sharecropper must therefore tithe his share of the produce during the first 6 years of the Shemitah cycle and treat the produce of the 7th year with the holiness of Shemitah produce. Whereas Rabban Gamliel Poter, the Mishnah says, Rabban Gamliel Poter, Rabban Gamliel rules that it is exempt from these laws because in his view, the rabbinic obligations of Maasot and Shemitah in Syria are limited to produce grown on land owned entirely by Jews. Therefore, according to Rabban Gamliel, if an idolater owns any share of the land in Syria, such as where an idolater and a Jew are partners, or where a Jew works as a sharecropper on an idolater's land, the produce is not subject to the laws of Maasrot and Shemitah. Now, we will see in the next Mishnah that although there is no biblical obligation outside of Eretz Yisrael to separate Challah, the rabbis decreed that in fact 2 portions of Challah are separated. One is burned and the other is given to a Kohen. In Eretz Yisrael, however, only 1 portion is separated. Now, the reason outside of Eretz Yisrael you must separate 2 portions is due to a rabbinic decree that assigns Tumah to lands outside Eretz Yisrael because of the unmarked graves located there, meaning, we're going to see in the Rambam's commentary in Masechet Ohalot, chapter 2, Mishnah 3, that idolaters did not always bury their dead in marked graves or cemeteries. Therefore, any place in their lands might be a gravesite. And therefore, rabbinically, Challah is separated outside of Eretz Yisrael. However, that Challah is tameh because of the tumah of the lands outside of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, such Challah may not be eaten and must be burned. But the rabbis decreed, however, that an additional portion of dough should be separated outside of Eretz Yisrael and give it to a Kohen to eat, even if he is tameh, so that the people living there will not forget the Challah actually belongs to Kohanim. The Mishnah now discusses how many portions of Challah are separated in Syria. Rabban Gamliel says, Shtei halot b'Syria, 2 portions of Challah are separated from dough in Syria, since it is outside of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Challah echat. But Rabbi Eliezer says only 1 portion of Challah is separated in Syria because Syria is treated like Eretz Yisrael, and it comes out according to Rabban Gamliel. Syria was included in the decree that assigned Tumah to lands outside of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore 2 portions of Challah must be separated from dough of Syria for the same reason that this is done outside Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Eliezer, on the other hand, follows his previously stated view that the rabbis equated Syria with Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the rabbinic tumah imposed on lands outside of Eretz Yisrael does not apply to Syria, and therefore only 1 portion of Challah is separated from dough in Syria. The Mishnah concludes, Achzu kulo shel Rabban Gamliel v'kulo shel Rabbi Eliezer. Originally, the people took hold of both the leniency of Rabban Gamliel regarding Ma'asrot and Shemitah and the leniency of Rabbi Eliezer regarding Challah. Therefore, Jewish sharecroppers in Syria did not observe the laws of Shemitah and Ma'asrot, yet they separated only a single Challah portion from dough of Syria. When they were made aware of the inconsistency of this approach, they changed their practice to follow the words of Rabban Gamliel, who did not equate Syria with Eretz Israel in both matters, and therefore the sharecroppers of Syria did not observe the laws of Ma'asrot and Shemitah, but they did separate two challah portions from the dough of Syria. And the Mefarshim explain both machlokot, both disputes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabban Gamliel center on whether Syria has the status of Eretz Israel proper. Rabban Gamliel maintains that Syria is more similar to lands outside of Eretz Israel, even though the rabbis applied some of the laws of Eretz Israel to Syria. Therefore, he exempts the produce of a Jewish sharecropper grown on an idolater's land in Syria from Ma'asrot and Shemitah, and similarly he maintains that Syria is included in the rabbinic decree of Tumah on lands outside of Eretz Israel, and therefore two challah portions must be separated from dough of Syria, whereas Rabbi Eliezer on the other hand maintains that the rabbis fully equated Syria with Eretz Israel, and therefore produce of Syria is subject to laws of Ma'asrot and Shemitah, and only one challah portion is taken there. Now, since each Tana uses the same reasoning in both machlokot, both disputes, it's contradictory to follow the leniencies of both Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. Therefore, the practice was changed to follow both the lenient and stringent rulings of Rabban Gamliel. And the Mefarshim explained the reason for accepting Rabban Gamliel's positions rather than those of Rabbi Eliezer is that Rabbi Eliezer was a disciple of Shammai, whose views are generally not accepted as halakha. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Zayin. Mishnah Chet now is a little long. We'll try to get through it Bezrat Hashem. But as an introduction, biblically, the mitzvah of Challah applies only in Eretz Israel and only when most of the Jewish people are living there. However, the rabbis required that Challah be separated even nowadays and even outside of Eretz Israel, but nevertheless, different areas have different laws based on the following. When Yeshua conquered Eretz Israel after Yetziat Mitzrayim, after the exodus from Egypt, he sanctified the lands that he conquered. However, this sanctification ended when the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed and the Jews were exiled to Bavel, to Babylonia, as the Rambam tells us in Ilchot Terumot, chapter 1, Halakha 5. 70 years later, the Babylonian exiles returned to Eretz Israel under the leadership of Ezra Sofer. They reconquered much, but not all of the land, and sanctified their areas of conquest. So this second sanctification, according to the view that will be followed in this Mishnah, remains in effect even today. Therefore, there are three regions regarding Challah. Number one, the area sanctified by Yeshua and re-sanctified by Ezra, which are still holy today. Number two, the area sanctified only by Yeshua, which was holy until the first temple was destroyed but are no longer holy. And number three, lands that were conquered neither by Yeshua nor by Ezra and were therefore never holy. The Mishnah describes how Challah is separated in each region. Rabban Gamliel says, Shalosh Aratzot leChallah, there are three regions with respect to the laws of Challah. The first region, the part of Eretz Israel re-sanctified by Ezra Sofer, which is still holy today. Me'eretz Israel bad Ksiv Challah Echat. In the area of Eretz Israel until the city of Kziv, one portion of Challah is separated, which is given to a Kohen and is eaten by him or an eligible member of this household, while he or she is tahor. And the Mefarshim explain, Kziv was the northernmost city to be conquered and re-sanctified by the Jews who returned from Bavel. Although the main northern border established by Ezra runs parallel to the town of Akko, which is south of Kziv, a strip of land extending northward from Akko to Kziv was also conquered and sanctified. That is the first region. Now, this area is sanctified even today, the Mefarshim explain, according to the view followed by this Mishnah. But nevertheless, in our times, when the majority of the Jewish people do not live on the land, the requirement of Challah is only rabbinic. Now, as in the time when the obligation was deoraita, biblical, the rabbis required someone who's baking for personal use to separate at least 1/24 of the dough as Challah. and someone who is baking bread to sell is required to separate 1/48 of the dough, like we learned in chapter 2, Mishnah 7. The second region, which was conquered and sanctified by Yeshua, but not by Ezra, Mikiziv vad Hanar vad Amana shte chalot, in the area from Kiziv eastward until the river, and from Kiziv westward until the mountains of Amana, which was originally part of Eretz Yisrael, but not conquered by Ezra. 2 challah portions are separated. Achad la'ur, one is to be burned in the fire, since this area is tameh from the tumah of lands outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'achad la'kohen, and one is to be given to the kohen, so that people should understand that the one that is burned in the fire is burned because of tumah. And the Mepharshim explain, when we said Mikziv Vadanal, in the area from Kiziv eastward until the river, the Mepharshim say it's unclear exactly which river the Mishnah is referring to. And when we say from Amana, from Kiziv westward until the mountains of Amana, Amana is a mountain or a group of mountains in the northwestern corner of Eretz Yisrael. Now, the Mepharshim explain the reason one is to be burned in the fire is because this region, which was not re-sanctified by Ezra, is subject to the rabbinic decree assigning tumah to lands outside of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore challah separated in this region is therefore tameh and must be burned. But again, we said another portion has to be separated and given to a kohen, so that people should understand that the one that is burned in the fire is burned because of tumah. And the Mepharshim explain, many people do not realize that this region is tameh, since it had once been part of Eretz Yisrael. So burning the challah of this region may lead people to think that challah that is tahor may be burned. The rabbis therefore decreed, because many people do not realize that the region is tameh, the rabbis decreed that an additional portion of challah is separated, which does have sanctity. This portion is given to a kohen and eaten by him even if he is tameh. So people will understand that there must be a reason why the first portion was burned and also not given to a kohen. They will therefore realize either on their own or it will be explained to them that the first portion is burned because of the tumah of the lands outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the Mishnah continues, Shel ur yesh la shi'ur, the one burned in the fire must have a minimum measure. V'shel kohen en la shi'ur, but while the one of the kohen has no minimum measure. And the Mepharshim explain, as in the region of Eretz Yisrael that was re-sanctified by Ezra Sofer, a portion of challah that is at least 1/24 or 1/48 of the dough, depending on whether it's for private use or for sale, is separated in this region which was not re-sanctified. Here, however, where 2 portions are separated, this requirement applies to only one of them. The rabbis applied the requirement to the portion of challah that is burned, which is similar to biblical challah, since it's burned because it's tameh. The portion given to the kohen, however, is completely rabbinic in origin and therefore doesn't have this it has no minimum measure. Now, the third region was never conquered and therefore never part of Eretz Yisrael. Mina nar, we're going to read the brackets. Umina manal v'lifnim shte chalot, from the river bank and from the foot of the Amana mountains inward toward the river eastward and toward the mountains westward, meaning the entire area from the river bank into the river and beyond, and from the foot of the mountains into the mountains and beyond. 2 challah portions are separated, and Mepharshim explained the river itself and the Amana mountains and beyond are entirely outside of Eretz Yisrael. 2 challah portions are separated. Achad la'ur, one is to be burned in the fire, since this area is tameh from the tumah of lands outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'achad la'kohen, and one is to be given to a kohen, so the law that is challah is given to a kohen not be forgotten. Shel ur en la shiur, v'shel kohen yesh la shiur. The one burned in the fire has no minimum measure, while the one of the kohen must have a minimum measure. And the Mepharshim explain, challah separated in this region, which was never part of Eretz Yisrael, is not at all similar to the biblical challah of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore both portions that are separated here are clearly midrabanan, rabbinic in origin, and therefore the rabbis preferred applying the requirement to separate the minimum amount of the portion given to the kohen, which will be eaten, rather than the portion that will be burned. In this case, the minimum amount of challah required for the portion that will be eaten by the kohen is 1/48 of the dough, regardless of whether it's being made for personal use or for sale, because this is the amount separated for any dough that became tameh unintentionally, like we learned in chapter 2, Mishnah 7. The Mishnah continues. The Mishnah now is going to present a situation where a single portion suffices in this third region. Utvul yom ochlah, but a kohen or a member of his household who is a tvul yom may eat the challah that otherwise would have been burned in the fire. And the Mepharshim explain Tvul Yom here refers to a man who immersed in a mikveh to purify himself after a seminal discharge. Even after immersing, a Tvul Yom retains a trace of Tumah for the rest of the day, and therefore may not eat biblical Challah until nightfall. But since Challah outside Eretz Yisrael is only rabbinic, the rabbis permitted a Tvul Yom to eat it, and a Kohen who became Tameh from an external source, like touching a Nevilah, an animal carcass, or a dead sheretz, may eat Challah from outside Eretz Yisrael, even if he has not yet immersed. Only Kohanim who became Tameh through bodily discharge, which is a relatively severe form of Tumah, and they have not yet immersed, are forbidden to eat this Challah. Now this discussion pertains to the first portion, the one that would otherwise be burned, because the second portion, which is given to a Kohen when the first portion is burned, may be eaten by him even if he is Tameh with a severe type of Tumah. So again, the Mishnah says, Utvul Yom Ochla, a Kohen or a member of his household who is a Tvul Yom, may eat the Challah that would otherwise have been burned in the fire, meaning we must burn the first portion of Challah and give a second portion to the Kohen only when there is no Kohen available who has immersed to purify himself from a bodily emission. If a Kohen who has immersed is present, the portion that would have been burned is given to him to eat, and there is no need to separate a second portion. And the Mefarshim explain the law stated previously in the Mishnah that requires that two portions be separated applies only if the only Kohanim available to receive the Challah were Tameh through bodily discharge. Since these Kohanim may not eat the first portion of Challah, that portion is burned. A second portion is separated and given to a Kohen to again remind people that Challah V'tzeh belongs to a Kohen. This portion may be eaten even by a Kohen who is Tameh with a severe type of Tumah. However, when there is a Kohen available who has immersed in a mikveh, even if he is a Tvul Yom, or if there is a Kohen available who is under the age of 9, whose discharge does not render him Tameh, a single portion of Challah, meaning 1/48 of the dough, is given to him to eat, and there is no need to separate a second portion. The Mishnah presents now an even more lenient opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, "Eno tzarich tvilah." He does not need to have immersed in order to eat Challah outside Eretz Yisrael, because Rabbi Yossi holds, since Challah outside Eretz Yisrael is only rabbinic in origin, it's the Rabbanan, it may be eaten even by a Kohen who is Tameh due to a bodily discharge. The Mishnah now goes back to the opinion of the Tana Kama. V'asura lazavim v'lazavot l'nida v'le'yoldot. Challah separated outside of Eretz Yisrael, meaning the portion that's separated to be burned, is forbidden to a Kohen or to a member of his household who is a Zav, Zava, Nida, or a woman who has given birth. And therefore, if the only available Kohanim or members of the household are Tameh with such types of Tumah, two portions of Challah must be set aside. One portion is burned, and the other portion may be eaten even by Kohanim or Tameh with such types of Tumah. And the Mefarshim explain just as a background, a Nida is a woman who experienced a menstrual discharge. On the biblical level, Midoraita, she is Tameh for 7 days, after which she immerses in a mikveh. Rabbinically, there are further laws and particulars to the purification process. A Zavah is a woman who had a discharge of blood during the 11 days that follow the 7-day Nidah period. And a Zav is a man who had a type of semen-like discharge. They also follow specific purification processes. Now, like we said, if the only available Kohanim are people with this type of Tumah, two portions are set aside, one burned and the other one eaten by any even Kohanim or Tameh with this type. This follows the view of this is the view of the Tana Kama, who allows only a Ban Keri who was a Tvul Yom to eat the portion of Challah outside of Eretz Yisrael that would otherwise been burned in the fire, not a Bal Keri who has immersed in a mikveh. Rabbi Yossi, however, treats a Zav, Zava, and Ida, a woman who has given birth, in the same manner that he treats a Balkeri. In his view, they may all eat Challah outside of Eretz Yisrael. It would therefore seem that a single portion of Challah would always suffice according to Rabbi Yossi, even if the only Kohanim available are Tameh. But again, like we said, the Tana Kama's opinion is only a Balkeri who was a Tvul Yom is allowed to eat the portion of Challah outside Eretz Yisrael that would otherwise been burned, not a Balkeri who has not immersed in a mikveh, only if he's a Tvul Yom. Now, as another introduction to the continuation of the Mishnah, Challah Eretz Yisrael is subject to a number of restrictions. A Kohen may not eat Challah Eretz Yisrael on a table where a non-Kohen is eating, out of concern that the non-Kohen may end up eating the Challah. It's also forbidden to give the Challah Eretz Yisrael to a Kohen who is not careful to observe the practice of eating chulin only under conditions of ta'ara. This is due to the concern that he might be careless with the Challah and allow it to become tameh. So the Mishnah explains that these prohibitions do not apply to the Kohen's portion of Challah outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'ne'echelet im azar al shulchan. It may be eaten by a Kohen along with a non-Kohen at one table. The rabbis did not forbid this due to the concern that the non-Kohen may eat the challah. V'nitenet lechol Kohen. It may be given to any Kohen, even to one who is not careful to eat chulin, only under conditions of tahara. Now, although we are normally concerned that such a Kohen might make the challah tameh, this concern does not exist outside Eretz Yisrael, where the challah is already tameh due to the rabbinic tumah of the land. It is absolutely forbidden, however, to give challah to a Kohen who is an Am Haaretz, an unlearned person, who is not meticulous in his mitzvah observance, even outside of Eretz Yisrael. This isur is based on a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim Bet, chapter 31, pasuk 4, which implies that the Kohanic gifts are to be given only to those who will use them to hold strongly to the Torah of Hashem. Latet minat kohanim v'alevim leman yechizku b'Torat Hashem. So we learn en notnin maneh ela lekohanim machzikim b'Torat Hashem. We only give the portion to kohanim who will use them to hold strongly to the Torah of Hashem. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Chet. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.